Gender and sexuality are so fluid. It's okay to change your mind a million times and figure out what works for you. It's okay to take your time. Amandla Stenberg. Bending Not Breaking, Pride, and Avatar. Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Bending Not Breaking and Pride. I am your host, Ben Pruitt, and I have just been blessed this whole past 2 weeks to dive into all of these Pride episodes and learn so much and engage and grow. And I'm just really thankful for all of you who are continuing to listen to these episodes. We've had amazing guests, and we are not holding back today. One of my favorite people is joining us as a guest today, and I'm really excited to learn and grow from them also. I want to be clear and say that this will be our final Pride episode for this year. We will, of course, always be considering Pride and the LGBTQ plus community in our content and in our episodes as usual, but Pride will not be necessarily our lens moving forward in our typical episodes. That said, we hope that you will continue to listen in as we return back to The Legend of Korra, Book 3. We have a lot of really great conversations planned for you to join us there also. And I just hope that we can continue to provide content that is nourishing and nurturing to those who listen. And so thank you all for being listeners. Thank you to our patrons, and thank you all to those of you who are wondering how to support us and then go and join our Patreon at BNB_pod. That is a huge, huge help to us, and we hope that you will consider doing so at your leisure, preferably today, but leisure is good. I will say that if you can't support us that way, that is no problem at all. We always love a good review. So thank you. And remember, both is good. Both is good. You can find us at BNB_pod on all things. But without further ado, let's just jump right in. Let's jump on into this episode on Pride and Avatar. And we have another guest today, and I am thrilled to welcome back to the podcast Indhira Udofia. That's right, she's back. How you doing?
I am good. Thank you for inviting me back to talk gay stuff. I'm excited.
I'm all about it. Let's get queer today. So I want to for the people who don't know you, start from ground zero. What's your whole deal? Give us your pronouns give us the whole deal.
All right. Dear Udofia, she, they pronouns. I am a rising third year PhD student, soon to be PhD candidate in a joint program in social work at North Carolina A&T and UNCG, studying religious trauma and African American millennials and Gen Zers. I am a therapist and a consultant, a cat mom to a mixie cat named Bisa, and all around just lover of all things nerdy and wonderful and great.
Yeah, we're queer, we're here, and we're loving it.
Yes. Oh, and also part-time mixologist. Having a really fun time experimenting this summer with cocktails.
Yeah, let's just start there because that's so important. Like, what is the drink of the summer right now?
So I started a window garden, and so I am growing mint, sage, and basil right now. So I have been doing a blackberry moonshine smash with sage in it, and it's
Okay.
been a time. I've been enjoying it. So anything with berries for the summer are kind of my jam, and watermelon. I'm a, but I recently discovered rhubarb and
Rhubarb's
done
great.
a couple of strawberry rhubarb cocktails that have been fantastic too. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of just fruit and herbs this summer.
Here, here. I made as soon as strawberry season hit and I saw rhubarb available, I was like, I gotta make a strawberry rhubarb pie. It was the time. And so I would have loved one of those drinks right alongside it.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you the recipe later, but I literally someone I went to Nashville with my mother to celebrate the end of the semester, and we went to go um, bourbon tasting because that's my favorite thing.
Now
So
we're talking.
we went to Tennessee and we stopped in Seaverville, went to Lynchburg, went to gosh, I will never remember exactly where Uncle Nearest's actual distillery is, but the Uncle Nearest distillery. And then we did a couple of local ones in Nashville
That's
and
awesome.
just did bourbon tours. So now I am like the person at the party who could talk to you about the stages and
Yeah,
like the oak barrels and how to taste and like,
that's
yeah,
awesome.
I'm obsessed.
Yeah, I we used to do bourbon flights at the restaurant I used to work at, and so I'm all about it too. Bourbon's
I
my
made my own flight board. I came home and made my own flight board so I can have stuff. So when you come over and we'll go outside, we'll do some bourbon tasting. One day we'll do some fun stuff like that. It'll be
all
great.
right. Making the trip. We could put that on the calendar. So
Yes.
we'll have a big old time for that. All right, but for today, let's recenter. I'm gonna be that guy and recenter us
Yes.
on Avatar
Yes.
and our queen, the Korra. So we're not going to exclude. But that's and there's Kyoshi, there's the novels, there's the comics, there's all these things, and I just want to kind of invite our listeners to hear your history with Avatar. What is it in your life? What place does it hold for you?
So I encountered, and I don't know if I said this in the other times, but like I encountered Avatar healing from a very bad relationship actually.
Interesting. Okay.
And so I happened to like move to Greensboro after kind of rebuilding my life from, you know, all the drama that is, dating. And
We're here.
I actually started watching it because I felt like I needed something pure, like something that
Mm,
I like didn't that I didn't have to really think too much about. I didn't have to like over involved. And I kind of got suckered into like just watching one episode just to see because I had heard my brothers talk about it. And it was a way for me to connect with my brothers in a way that I can't do as the older sibling because I'm always the responsible one. And then I became obsessed. Finished all of the first Avatar in a week, finished the second one in about a week, just and I can see. So Avatar to me represents this like really pure place where it reminds me how to get back to me. It almost, I mean, it's like a lot of the cartoons that we watch in our adulthood's life. Like it's very much on the same tier of like Steven Universe and Shira and like all these places where it's like it just
yes.
reminds you of the joy of possibility
Mm,
that we get robbed of when we are older and adulting.
yeah.
And so Avatar gives me permission to slow myself down and just think about what the purity of just unadulterated possibility can look like.
Wow.
Um, and so that is how I come to Avatar. I'm still way behind. I'm not like a super fan like you, obviously. I'm still behind on the books. We had a private conversation. I'm going to start catching up. But I am the show itself represents a place when I feel like I need to come back to that pure inner self, that
Mm.
dreams, that actually is optimistic and hopeful when the temptation of nihilism feels really great.
Yeah. And I think it's worth being explicit and naming how the Avatarverse is that source of purity source of healing, source of comfort for a lot of people. It's so much more than a TV show that people come back to. It's a source of something that nurtures in a way that a lot of times people are unable to capture and really name why that is. And so it's really special. And I just appreciate you naming some other shows that also kind of offer
Yeah.
it for us.
Yeah. And I think part of it is centered around the fact that, like, so much of what we have been facing as a society in recent months, we can be inundated with so much. And within 20 minutes of a cartoon, right?
Yep.
Things are not necessarily tied up in a neat bow, but you
Yeah.
still feel hopeful enough to fight. So when I am ready to tap into that warrior, that part that gets fatigued from having to advocate at all of my intersections,
Yeah.
Korra is a good place to talk about what does unrepentant self-resolve look like in the face of adversity, right? So I can watch Korra and get that, like, I don't care how much you think you're going to destroy me. Like, there is something that I can do to fight, right? There's some way I can make it out of it. And I still bear the wounds, right? I still
Yeah.
hold these scars, but it doesn't take away my power or my possibility, right? Of doing something great and being something great. You know,
Yeah.
when I want to, like, tap into just naivete and, like, just believing in the power of people, that's when I can turn to Aang, right? Like, think there's,
Yes.
you know, and when I just want to be a stone cold killer and a boss, Kyoshi is right there. And I can
Yep.
just listen to that little snippet of Kyoshi and be like, you know what? Yeah, sometimes you have to make the hard choices. I think there's characters and people that tap into these different modes of how we need to see ourselves.
Yeah.
And we'll talk a little bit when we think about our avatar moment later, about just, you know, journeying through the different ways that we define ourselves and we evolve ourselves and we evolve, that this show holds in a very
Yeah.
digestible way. And it's doing a lot of radical work. And so, yeah.
And I think that again, really naming that for me is being willing to say that that is a spiritual practice. That is
Mhm.
something that is connecting me to the larger world, right? When I can zoom in on Quora, and I wrote a blog post about this recently. So we are recording after the Roe versus Wade decision that has been taking over the news and Twitter by storm. And I was really struggling when that came out, and I couldn't concentrate at work. I was like, what do I do? And I turned to Quora,
Mhm.
and I watched an episode of Korra, and I processed as I wrote and processed as I watched, and I was watching it with the lens of Roe versus Wade. And at the end of it, I was like, I feel better because Korra has shown me ways to grapple with this. It has shown me what works. It has shown me what do you do when you have an Earth Queen that's oppressive and tyrannical and doing things like, okay, this is giving me hope. And I think naming that as a spiritual practice is something that a lot of people are like, this isn't what, but that's what that is. That is a spiritual practice if that's something that you're turning to Avatar for.
Yeah. I mean, all spirituality, religion, things, right, are opportunities to point at a reflective space, right? To make meaning, to construct reality, and to find guidance. And so if, you know, looking to The Legend of Korra or Avatar: The Last Airbender makes meanings or makes sense, right? I don't think it's any less spiritual than looking at some other sacred text, right? There's a lot of sacred text. There's a lot of different canons that we have in our life that point us back to what is divine and pure, and good. And I think that there's something to be said about how these shows, how this writing, how this genre of storytelling does a lot of the heavy lifting and
Yeah.
translates sometimes often the messages that we purport these historical sacred texts do way better than than how we preach and teach it on a Sunday morning or a Friday afternoon, you know. So I think there's something to be said about it.
Yeah. Okay, so we've heard your kind of relationship with Avatar, and now I want to kind of point us towards the other half of our conversation today, which is pride. So what is your relationship with pride and whatever that means to you?
Yes. So, as a proud Black, queer, gender expansive, sometimes aggressive femme, I know pride. I think I went to my first pride when I think I was in college. But before that, I went to art schools for most of my K through 12 career. So queerness was something that was always kind of in the waters that I swam in.
Yeah.
Um, you know, coming out wasn't necessarily an event. It was just kind of like a that tracks, like I was where I think I was really playing with my gender, even when if I can point back to times like in my elementary school career, there were times where I can clearly say like, oh, you were playing with gender a little bit. You were never fully just like a girl. And that's
Yeah.
cool. My dad used to joke and say that I was the first son a lot, and I used to kind of like ha ha ha, but like now in hindsight I was like it's kind of true. I definitely was a lot more masculine as a child. Very rough and tumble, wanted to play football, used to wrestle with my boy cousins, was wearing like a lot of jerseys. There's a really good picture of me in 10th grade wearing like the Jinko wide jeans and like a FUBU sweater, like very like Black
Yeah.
urban. I never fully felt comfortable with the scripting of womanhood, and I didn't know why. And I think part of it was because of how womanhood was taught in my like
Yeah.
religious settings, and the kind of the expectations just never fit my reality. And so anytime Pride season comes around, and I'm always kind of reminded of Pride not just being this idea of just being proud of who I am and not just about the parades and the rainbow capitalism. Although my mom did give me a rainbow doormat for Pride. I do get Pride gifts. It's like Pride Santa, but it's also about homecoming, right? It's about taking a time to evaluate what does it mean to come home to yourself and to be proud
Mm.
of the home that you built. And so every pride is kind of a way for me to kind of analyze and do like this gut check around, am I living authentically to who I am? How am I integrating these values of authenticities in the communities I create and the ways that I teach and the ways that I, write and the ways I create? And how do I create home and sanctuary, not only for myself, for the people around me?
Oh, I just like there's so much there that I was like, oh, that would be a full hour conversation if we just talked about that and then that and then that and then that. So there's
Yeah.
like that's such a rich response to the vision of what Pride kind of has been for you, how it manifests, and then this vision of what also it brings for you on a regular basis in terms of like a yearly look back and something to appreciate. So oh, there's so much there. That's just so wonderful. Your story kind of reminds me of my childhood. And I was like, as you were talking about your child, I was like, man, you're speaking my language. Because I was the kid I had four older brothers,
Mm-hmm.
and I was forced into a very masculine frame.
Mm-hmm.
But I was also that kid who was like, I want to wear the tutu, and then oh, I want to I'm going to paint my nails, and then I'm going to do this, and then I got boxed into this like you're like all the slurs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, okay, I have to like, how do I mitigate all of these things? And I used to have a recurring phrase in my head of I would have been such a good girl. Like I would have rocked being a girl. And I've been slowly grappling with that for my entire life, and really just kind of, again, as you say, going through this homecoming of,
Mm-hmm.
okay, what is, now that I don't have to deal with these uh filters of toxic masculine filters of what is okay, how do I start to mitigate who I really am and really have that conversation? There's a whole lot of unlearning that has to happen there.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been doing that for a hot minute. So
Yeah. And I always tell people, like, it's okay if if home feels strange, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
okay. I think when we talk about coming home or having a homecoming, it's supposed to be this like immediate aha moment. But home is weird. Like, home can get real strange and weird. And it doesn't always mean that, like, the label I have for myself today is the label I have to keep,
Yeah.
which is very difficult for an earth sign queen like myself. As someone who loves consistency, us Virgos
I'm a
know.
Virgo too. I know the
Yeah,
feeling.
the vibes. It's like, what's a category R is a category, and it's like, not really. I'm trying to embrace the more water sign placements in my charts that allows me to be fluid, right? Um, and so I think, being able to figure out and mitigate what that looks like or feels like in real time is such a gift. It's such a gift to be able to name, like, hey, like, yeah, I kind of want to paint my nails. And also, now straight cishet white men are painting their nails all the time. Machine Gun Kelly does it all the time. It's like now a trend, right?
Yeah.
So it just shows you just how fragile these categories have been and will continue to be.
Yeah.
Which means that I can just kind of dance in the middle and figure out whatever I feel like for the day.
Yep. Subvert the norm. That's
Mhm.
like destabilizing the norm is really all about what queerness is, right? And
Mhm.
in that respect, I like am like queer all my life, always been, always will be. Like, get rid of that norm all day long. Um, but so it goes.
Yeah, so that's pride.
Well, I can't wait to combine these two conversations now and invite you into this question of, now that we've kind of laid the groundwork, what
Mhm.
are, or what is the moment, the ship, the scene that you kind of have brought for us today to discuss when you ask the question around Avatar and Pride and put those two together? What comes up for you?
So there's two things that come up for me in particular, and they kind of go together and they kind of don't. So we'll see how it goes. But the one thing I want to talk about is just kind of like the politics of representation. Because
Interesting.
I think when we talk about Avatar and Pride, we would be remiss not to discuss how politics shape the imagination of what we see and who we see as part of our communities, right?
Interesting.
And I
Okay.
say that as someone who is going to point out a possible connection of someone who is canonically considered a straight presenting person, but
Okay.
Nate may not be straight at all, right? Which is my homie Sokka. So
Hey.
I I have been thinking a lot about it from my own understanding of my own gender journey and how I came to land at a reclamation of femininity without being a woman. Um, which is loaded, right? Um, I think when we look at Sokka and we look at his journey, navigating the expectations of masculinity and all that is kind of coded and represented in what does it mean to be the big brother, right? To a woman of power. I think we have to think about, or at least contend with the fact that in his unlearning of what is possible for how he could show up as a brother, as a partner, as a friend, as just a human being, that undoing creates not only turmoil but also creates signaling towards possibilities that maybe when it was all said and done, maleness wasn't what he fully identified with at the end of the day. Now, we can't fully say it for sure, obviously it's not canon, but my heart canon says that Sokka's gender expansive.
I had not considered this. And I love that you're kind of bringing this to our attention because, there's a lot of questions from the fandom around like, well, why didn't Sokka have kids?
Mm-hmm.
And this this could be a potential kind of indicator for that. And there's a lot of straight people who don't have kids, but like this being something where like maybe he was allowing himself to kind of experience other forms of romantic relationships or aromantic, right? Like, there's all kinds of possibilities here. So that's fascinating.
Yeah. So here's the reason why I'm shaking the table a little bit about this, is because the way in which we are introduced to Sokka, especially Sokka's pursuit of romantic relationships,
Yeah.
feels like compulsory heterosexuality.
It really
In
does.
a nutshell.
Absolutely.
It's a very performative display of romantic connections that is not indicative of how other romantic relationships naturally formed, not only through the canon of the kind of the Avatar universe, but even post Avatar into Legend of Korra. No other character navigates or expresses this certain level of romantic attraction in the same way that Sokka seems to perform.
Yeah.
And a lot of people will be like, oh, he's just being a toxic, like, tongue wagging dude,
Yep.
da, 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 da. But how much of that is a rehearsed expectation of how you're supposed to pursue relationships versus what you actually desire, or versus, maybe some type of other way of maybe like, do I actually want to be with them, or do I just think they're really cool and admire them for who they are?
Well, and I think a lot of times I can think of 3 books off the top of my head where the main character or one of the main characters like realizes through like, oh, I was perfectly fine being straight. It was I was satisfied, and I didn't know until I was pushed or put in a position to question. And because that's just what's expected, and I fell in line. And like I'm a big fan of Serena Bowen as an author, for romance, all of my romance novels that I'm on Audible, like not promoting Audible at all, but Audible. Serena Bowen has so many books out and lots of romance novels, and one of her queer romance novels is called Top Secret, and I just love the characters. They're so lovely. And it's the classic like broken, trying to really hard and broken, and then kind of softens up, versus the one who has been straight his entire life and realizes that he is like, wait a second, I thought I was straight, then I thought I was bi, now I realize I'm just gay. Like, and it's this transition, and it's so beautiful how these characters are showing us what it looks like to be comfortable with change, and to it, like, that doesn't mean that every guy is going to like, every guy's secretly gay, is not what we're saying. But rather that if you allow yourself to remove the shackles of what you have been told all your life, all of a sudden it's like, whoa, what do I really want? What do I really want to experience? And I think a lot of people would feel certainly a more expansive form of attraction than, I don't know that everybody would, full tilt switch, but I think the attraction would certainly be more expansive.
Yeah, and even just orientation be expansive, right? Like, just thinking about it from a gender perspective, I think if I knew that I had permission to not claim womanhood fully, if I could just honor the femininity that was inside of me and realize that that was separate from the construction of womanhood that was presented back to me,
Yeah.
I would be completely different, right? Like, I would, my journey, my path, how I saw relations, half the people that I gave chances to would not have a chance, like I would have done things a lot different. Like, I give a lot of compassion for young Indira. She did what she knew to do. She tried very hard to be, the model woman from this type of construction of womanhood that was presented to her. And, adult Indira, they get to say, maybe twice a week, maybe 3 times if I'm lucky. You know, I feel
Yeah.
that fantasy, and other times it's not. Like, I don't think I move through the world in a way that beholdens me to these conscriptions, because honestly, my race is a queer experience. Me being Black is inherently queer. Me being queer, right?
Yeah.
Me being, from the South and spiritually fluid makes me queer. Like, there's so many things in my life that I have had to undo and give back to people so that myself is destabilized, right? In the most beautiful way possible. And I see Sokka's journey through Avatar going through that same process of giving back these expectations, giving back these scripts, giving back these assumptions about his character and who he is and how he shows up in the world. And once he let go and gave it back to other people, there wasn't much left for him to carry and figure out. And so it just seems like it was endless, right? The way that story could continue, right? And like the fact that even when you think about the story, when you think about it and you reflect back and listen to like Legend of Korra, the fact that his story doesn't really continue in this way, like it's just kind of like, well, we know Sokka was a thing, but like we don't know what happened. We don't know where he landed. We don't know what he decided to do. And part of that could have been because once you know that you don't have to be or have to do certain things, it's very difficult to like to not expand that possibility into how you present yourself, how you move through the world, how you navigate and choose family and belonging and possibility.
Wow. Yeah, no, I'm just like want to go rewatch all of the whole everything with that in mind and just watch him interact and being like, okay, what does it mean for this scene to be this forced on you masculinity that you don't align with and you don't even know you don't align with it.
I just think about and I can't ever remember the warrior's name that he partners with. Suki. Like I think about his courtship with Suki and like the pursuit of that relationship and like the level of discomfort around trying to navigate his masculinity with this like badass warrior. And I think a lot about like, when your masculinity or when your gender gets confronted in such a visceral way and you have to decide whether or not you're going to still choose to trouble the waters or you're going to retreat, like it can be a lot of bumbling. But then by the end of that relationship, right, like when you see that relationship kind of like met out, there's a certain level of tenderness and softness and like fluidity to which it's like you're like, were you actually romantically into, or you just wanted to be friends? Because there was a lot of people that I dated when I was cosplaying as a straight person that I just wanted to be their friends. Like the romance piece actually didn't didn't translate the way that I thought it was going to, right? But it also took me, but I felt the pressure to live up to that level of engagement because I thought that that's the only way that I could engage, right? Or that's the only way I could codify these feelings or these emotions as, oh, because you feel this like strong allegiance or this strong care for this person, it's automatically romantic. And it's like, or do I actually like actually like I want to low-key be them? Like, do I just like want to be their twin? Do I want to be their friend?
So many friend crushes in my life that I'm just like, I want us to be an us.
Yeah, and I was like, that us doesn't automatically codes to romance, right? It just, I've had my share of platonic soulmates in my life, and like I am deeply and wildly in love with all my friends. I say that all the time, and folks get really weird about it, and I'm like, I don't think you understand. I will harm because I deeply love my friends in this way that is deep and abiding. and I will never want to sleep with any of them. Right.
Yeah.
Like I just,
right.
it's not, there's no erotic attraction, but there is a lot of just like tenderness, and I can see myself being reflected back to me in the beautiful ways that we call each other into being. That
Yeah.
is not romantic. And if I wasn't careful, right, if I didn't do that work of unlearning like this compulsory
Yes. Yes.
mythicism, or, you know, just like as someone who practices relationship anarchy, I would totally screw the pooch a lot of the times with these people that I would care about, because if I'm not expansive, if I don't codify it right, if I don't have a queer orientation, it is very easy to confuse and then be possessive, or confuse and then be, you know,
Yeah.
mixed breed attraction, and then things fall apart, right? And so
Yeah.
that unlearned, I saw so much of that in the way, like, you know, as I like was like, you know, reviewing some stuff before our conversation, I was like, Sokka reminds me a lot of me. Like a
Yeah.
lot of high school Indira was in Sokka. And I turned out pretty dope and great. I feel like Sokka did too.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just really appreciating this new framework. It's fascinating. And it's something that I don't know that I would have gotten there on my own. I don't know that I would have found that and I would have seen that, because I was still stuck in Sokka is man. But like, you know, I think where I definitely am tracking is like we talked about on the podcast before, how Sokka has been unlearning a lot of his you know, toxic masculinity and a lot of the patriarchal expectations of the man for the village. And that kind of unlearning is very, very parallel to the type of unlearning that we're talking about. And in fact, they're integral to one another. So I just am kind of expanding my view on that and really just.
And I think part of it, right, goes back to the second part of this, which is the politics of representation, right? If we did not have a certain amount of expectations around what we believe that people are ready for, a la Don't Say Gay, banning kids at drag shows, right? If we're not able to signal or point to possibility, it's very easy to get like locked into a certain type of articulation of what evolution and learning and even decolonizing actually does in real time. But there is something to be said about the fact that, like, if 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 the creators were actually able to tease out and build this fully enfleshed world on the screen, would we still have these kind of rigid understandings of who these people are, knowing how, you know, the canon outside of the shows have manifest or evolved, right? Like, I think a lot of it is, we sometimes when it comes to representation, so much of marginalized communities spend a lot of times engaging in apologetics and asking for permission to exist, rather than being bold and revolutionary enough to just exist and be, and allow other people to enter into that mode of bravery with them.
Yeah. You know what that kind of reminds me of is, you know, depending on where this goes and who this reaches, and if we post about it in the right format, you know, there'd be a lot of people who'd be like, no, Sokka's totally straight, and I won't hear anything else about it because that's the end and that's it. And I think my question is, what do you lose if Sokka is not straight? Like, what do you lose?
I can tell you are someone who went to UNC School of Social Work, because that is my favorite therapy question. What does it cost you to imagine something alternate to your reality?
Yeah.
That is the thing. And at the end of the day, it doesn't change anything. It doesn't change the integrity of the person. It just allows it scares you, because then you realize just how fragile these constructs are.
Exactly.
And so by caring about or rooting for or finding yourself in a queer character versus a sit het character, it's like, well, if I find myself in this queer person, does that make me less straight? Not really. But even if it is that the end of the world, right? Is it so bad to imagine yourself as this non-normative? And because we know that the constructs are made up anyway.
Yeah.
It's a failed project. We
Well,
have learned,
we know.
right? We as queer people have acknowledged that gender is a failed project. Gender is in its flop era, sexuality is in its flop era.
Yeah.
Earth is in its flop area. We realize that we are not in a space where the things that we have purported as taken for granted, right and wrong, are actually right and wrong. I mean, even down when we think about talking about just the political time that we're in with, the queer antagonistic, trans antagonistic legislation, when we talk about things, it's all connected, right?
Yeah.
The decision comes out, and immediately in the argument, they're saying, oh, by the way, we're coming for Oberfeld too. Like we're the idea of privacy is slowly eroding. So it doesn't matter if you identify as straight or queer, or if you're a cisgender first person or transgender or non-agender or whatever the case may be, wherever you land on the spectrum, whether you're a part of the alphabet mafia or not, you are deeply implicated by these constructs.
Yep.
Why invest in constructs that at any given moment could be the thing that causes you something that is death dealing and life depleting?
Here.
And so when people are like, oh, Sokka is straight, cool, Sokka could be straight, but also what does that then teach you about straight performativity?
Right? Well, and it's like, again, you only gain by considering other options. There's only gaining, right? And you're expanding the possibilities of what could be. And it reminds me of Schrodinger's cat.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It is true until we open the box, right? And both can be true. And how queer is that? Like how queer is it that we are both straight and not straight until we can open that box? And guess what, y'all? The only way to open the box
is to open it.
You have to actually take the steps to gain this awareness and learn and grow. Otherwise, the box is closed and it's both all at once. So you're queer regardless of your choice.
Right. And I think that's one of the things is like, category, when we think about how we learn and what the functions of categories, right, as being ways for neural pathways to build connections and to create meanings and neural links, right? We understand that like our brain benefits from some type of categorical filing system so we can access certain things. What we also understand is that sometimes the things that are taken for granted as natural, the things that we take for granted as like things that are staple and that we have to do are not, right? We know that categories don't exist. We know that we are dynamic people, that we're constantly in flux, evolution, and in motion. We know that the world is ever changing. And so sometimes our filing systems don't work the way we think they work. So sometimes we don't, there's some chaos. And sometimes leaning into chaos is a good thing.
I'm all about it. You know who also is all about it? Zahir.
Absolutely.
Right. I've been thinking a lot about Zahir recently and how he's like such a villain. And I'm sitting here going like, Zahir had a lot going right. And I'm just like,
had a lot going right.
Yeah.
Had a lot going right. Like,
yeah.
There's so many, and like, I mean, it's very low key. And I know this is going to sound controversial and y'all can drag me. It's fine. I'm a big girl. I can take it. Azula low-key, we give her a bad rap. What if Azula is a closeted person? How do we then read her rage? How do we then read the relationships that she had, especially her relationship with Ty, right? Like there are things, right, that we talk about when we talk about villainy that we actually need to really pay attention to, because who's the real villain in it? Are they villains based off of their own, inherent evil nature, which is very like fall related, people are human, or are the constructs so oppressive that the only expression to deal with the pressures of navigating a world include rage and rebellion?
Here, here. Well, and it's fascinating to think of Azula that way in more than one regard, because of thinking about perhaps it's just orientation and that's the only thing that has to be bottled up, but the fact that she is younger and is essentially acting as the heir in a patriarchal society. Like this past several Fire Lords have all been male. In fact, all the ones we know of except for after Zuko are male, right? And so what that, like, thinking about the living into what it means to be the male heir once Zuko is gone. And that's part of the reason she probably resents Zuko, right? Is watching him getting to be his self and to be authentic and to expand into who he becomes. Of course Azula's resentful of that. Of course she's going to respond the way she does, right?
As an older sister who has two younger brothers, hi Fred and Akan, because I know you will listen and I love you very, very much. The way in which, as an older woman and having two younger, someone who's been coded as woman, right? I feel for Azula so hard because there's a certain level of inherent roughness that you are now taught. And then, like, even as a Black woman, right? Like, when I get read as a Black woman, there's a certain amount of softness that I am not afforded anymore, right? I have to be able to advocate for myself. I have to be the one who can write the letters and like to like really like, tell it how it is. And I also have to be political, and I also have to be tight, right? I can't ever be soft. I can't cry on the job. I can't do any of that stuff. That is enough to make anyone below your top, right? And when you're thinking about just the ways in which the society of the Fire Nation itself being a deeply queer antagonistic space, right? Like, it is very built on rigidity and traditions and norms and, exerting a certain amount of level of power. If I find myself liking a really cute girl and I'm caring about them way more than I should, I'd probably be freaking out and tearing stuff up too.
Yeah. Well, and it's and to put that into like, let's look at the other side too. Of course, it's this impossible standard on the one end, and then when you do flip out, there's this whole rhetoric around Black anger, especially Black women who are angry, right? And thinking about, like, it's you lose one way and you lose the other. It's a lose-lose situation, rather than like the zero-sum game only is effective for one type of person, and that is a white male. And so right. And
I wonder like how that gets coded as villainy, right? Exactly. And so there's a lot of folks now who are like, I'm entering into my villain era. And it's about being healthy and holistic, building boundaries, communicating effectively. Said nothing about that is insidious and evil.
And thinking about it also from, the rhetoric of real life for a second, and then we'll go back to comparing that to Avatar, but thinking about how, when you think about people who go into mass shootings and how they are described by the media, if they are Black versus if they are Asian versus if they are Muslim versus if they are white, right? Thug, we get extra slurs, they're the worst. And then when it's a white person, it's like, we really need to consider the mental health of the country and focus on, right? And like,
he is such a good boy.
Yeah.
He's 35. What do you mean?
He just made a mistake, right? And killed 30 people, right? And so
someone didn't say hello to him that morning, and that's why he had a bad day. And it's like, or not, like, Jamila Jones. They are Sunny Day Jones on Twitter. I'm sure they don't mind me shouting them out. But they had a really poignant tweet shortly after one of the mass shootings saying that white women do not have to worry about the reflection of their parenting when a white male shooter gets caught, right? Like white privilege is learning that your idea of parenting, family making, and societal, like communal growth is not being reflected back to you, right? That like rugged individualism is such a thing that like Black people and other people of color are not afforded. And I think about that a lot when it comes to like even me making categories or claiming certain terms or terminologies, right? Like, you know, that me saying like I don't identify with being a woman does not reflect back on the community of Black women that have nurtured and loved me into being. It's just saying that like, you know, there were certain kind of codes around white femininity in particular that never felt ideal. And when we evoke the word woman, we cannot divorce white supremacy in that definition. Right. And also, there's some stuff around just Black women culture that just doesn't feel true to how I show up and move through the world. But it doesn't make Black womanhood bad or good.
So reframing this idea of who we refer to as the villain, right? I think is very central to the way, because Avatar and Korra is a narrative that we are being given. We have been given this narrative, and we are told that Zahir is the villain. We are told that Kuvira, that Aman, that Unalaq, these are the villains, and Korra is doing not everything right, but is the protagonist, right? And I think what makes Korra so compelling as a show is that all of these so-called villains are making really important points.
I'm still convinced Kuvira had a point.
I think they all did. They all did. Like, Zahir is like spouting some wisdom over here. Like, we will never be truly free as long as we have these oppressive governments. I'm sitting here going like, yeah, like, how do we fix that? Okay. Like, and so like I'm sitting
got any notes? You know.
In Aman, right? Thinking about this bender, non-bender equality, like, yeah, we need to have a conversation here. This is something that needs to be addressed. All of them have something that needs to be addressed. Unalaq addressing the balance of the world and thinking about bringing the spirits back and really nurturing that. Like, again, all of them are saying something that is really important, but they're being coded and using language as if they are the villain. And now they're not doing everything right? They are extremists, right? But I think we have to really be careful about the language of villainy, right? And really question who is calling them the villain, and for what reason, and how do we measure and quantify and collect data around what that really means.
I think, when we talk about villainy and using the device of villainy, I don't know how many people, at least maybe it's just because I've always had an affinity towards villains. Maybe that's it. I mean, my favorite baseball team is the Yankees, so I should just tell you about just kind of how literally Yankees, Cowboys, Lakers, my favorite sports teams.
Oh, you're the worst.
I really am. And was raised to love these people too. But I think part of it, right, is when we think about the master narrative, and I use that word intentionally, villains are often, while they may be kind of codified as wrong or boo hiss, they do point us to think about the complicity we have as a society in navigating some of the inequities that these villains are pointing out, right? Yes. So like, even when I think about Korra's relationship with Turlock, right? Who's like, there's a privilege of being the Avatar. There's a certain privilege. Get to work. Like, you want the state to like revere you, you want the celebrity. Well, that comes with something.
Yeah.
Are you willing to pay the cost that comes with visibility,
Yeah.
right? The answer is no, I don't want to do that. But when Korra kind of emerges on the scene, low-key, she's with it, right? Like there's a certain part of us that, if we are honest with ourselves, the villains not only point to particular points, but it also points out to the complicitness we have as a society in navigating these systems of inequities that create the villains in the first place. So
Yeah.
I think, as someone who is really interested in stories, really interested in working with folks who have been demonized and villainized as a people, right? I am constantly aware that just because author may be naming them as the villain doesn't mean that they actually think they're wrong. Like,
Well, I think
but I
that's
think villainy is a good teacher in that.
100% agree. And I think that's, the people, oftentimes when you bring up villains, people attribute these things to being like the individual is the problem rather than the system that created, right? And thinking about Azula, like Azula, there's no way for Azula to be redeemed here. There's a lot of people who would be like, no, not everybody deserves a redemption arc, right? That is a line that a lot of people have, and it's a lot of times I think is coming from this rugged individualism that we are so steeped in as a culture, where our training literally is all about social lens, right? And from a social work lens, and focusing from how does the system play a role. And a lot of people just like, what system?
But I think is, if you acknowledge a system, then you have to figure out what your role and your space is in it. And that's uncomfortable, right? Like, when we think about Azula, and it's very easy to make Azula's cruelty a personal problem. How dare you not deal with the pressures of patriarchy? How dare you not deal with the pressures of a cruel childhood? How dare you
I did. Why can't you?
Right. As if you are actually doing that work, right? There's a false sense of security and coping. I actually was having a conversation with a really close friend of mine before our call, and we were talking about how we have often conditioned ourselves to have high tolerances of pain. And that, like, my mom's favorite phrase is, when I'm like doing transitions, because, again, earth sign, love to be stable, is, you can do anything for a year. So even when my like somatic system is telling me like, this might be too much of a change, or this might be too big of a move, or this might not be aligned to how I move or need to move in the world, you can do anything for a year kind of kicks in and has me supersede my fear response, which could be an instructor, right? In the moment, rather than this inhibitor. And so when I think, well, why couldn't someone tolerate something? I did it for a year. Anyone can do a year. I survived, fill in the blank grad school program. Why is everybody else having a moment in fill in the blank grad school program? I'm not going to play our alma mater like that, but but then I have to remind myself, you had a lot of violence that was attached to those years, and you're just now connecting to that pain. That's not, so if someone walks out of a classroom when you were able to sit there and not walk out, that doesn't make them a villain. We're both victims. The system is the villain, right?
Just because I have intense dissociative ability does not mean everybody does.
Right. And that's okay. And I think, sometimes we are asking people to cope, to reframe, to bypass, to medicate for things that are just inherently wrong.
Here.
I am no longer profiting in the language of resiliency for the sake of revolution. I'm not doing it anymore. And I think, like, when we think about villains and we think about the villain arcs and we think about these villains who had points, right? they're touching on the nerve that I should not have to be resilient when revolution is possible.
Mic drop. There it is. That's the line. I should not have to be resilient when revolution is possible.
Yeah.
There it is. That's it. That's the line.
Yep. I'm good on that. Happy Pride.
Yeah. Happy Pride, y'all. All right. So okay. It's time. We're gonna move to gratitude. That's it. We did it. Okay. So we're transition. Dun, 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 dun. We did it. We solved the world's problems. And just kind of reinviting this, like, I'm so fired up. I have to like, whoo. Yeah. Who, in light of our conversation today, who is a character that you're grateful for?
Can I have two?
Yeah, why not? More gratitude, the better.
Obviously, Toph forever and ever. I'm gonna be grateful for, because Toph's everythingness is so clear to me. And I love my earth sign queen, who reminds me of all of my Taurus besties in my life. And I'm grateful because she points back to our last thing, right? Like this idea of the uses of rage, and how, like, Audre Lorde talks about it, is how Toph embodies life, and I appreciate it. And then the second person I want to shout out is, I'm gonna shout out Sokka, because I think that Sokka,
that's my them.
Whether or not they consider themselves gender expansive, or he considers himself cishet, there is something beautiful about the journey that teaches us that just because we get these expectations doesn't mean that we have to keep them. And we can get to choose possibility off the grid.
Yeah. I have a hard time not being grateful for Korra ever. But especially in light of her journey is a more visible version of what you're kind of expressing with Sokka, right? She was in this box of, oh, I'm a girl, I have to like boy. And then there's Mako, who is the casualty, and right. And then she like slowly starts to like, wait a second. And then it takes 3 seasons for her to kind of lean into Asami, right? And that turns out to be a several year process. And so I just appreciate her giving us one possible way to see how that transformation happens.
A queen, an icon, a legend.
Indeed. Yeah.
In my opinion, the best Avatar, but
at least of all the ones we know of.
I was gonna say second to Koshi, to be honest, because Koshi I think is just the best Avatar, period.
Yeah, especially once you get to the
I'm excited.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we did it. We had talk about expansive. We had an expansive conversation today. I have been expanded upon. I feel better, and I feel like I've learned, and it's all thanks to Avatar. Avatar facilitated this. So I'm grateful to Avatar.
Grateful for Avatar and our friendship in light of it, because without Avatar, we wouldn't know each other.
It's just true. This is true. All right. Well, you heard it here, folks. This has been another episode of Bending Not Breaking. I am deeply, deeply grateful to you, Indhira, for joining us. And until next time, everybody.
Bye.
Be well and do good.